Welcome. It's my pleasure today to introduce someone that many of you already know, Port of Bellingham Executive Director Rob Fix. Rob has lived in Bellingham since 1999, hence the many of you already know Mr. Fix, and was appointed to the Port's Executive Director position in 2012. His outstanding virtue is being the father of two sons, 16 and 18 years old, and therefore an avid supporter of youth sports. As he told me, keep the kids off the screen. Yes, we can all agree with that. We also have to note that he is a graduate of Washington State University. Go Cougs. Ray. Rob is in charge of a special purpose municipal corporation, which we know as the Port of Bellingham. As I was preparing for this program, the thought occurred to me, why a special legal entity called a port district? Why isn't the port a department of City Hall or at the county? Why do we have this thing? Well, of course, historylink.org has the answer. The Port District Act was passed by the legislature in 1911 in response to the lack of public access to waterfront property, unsafe, unsanitary working conditions, high wharf rates, inefficient economic development, uncoordinated infrastructure development, all created by competing private ownership, i.e. the railroads. You can imagine the drama, the political drama that must have ensued around 1911, returning lands from the railroads to public ownership. But why that new legal entity instead of just handing it over to City Hall? Well, apparently the legislature in 1911 did not trust local municipalities. There was a fear of corruption, I believe was the word. So today, we have the Port District we know, and in Washington it's a little unusual because our commissioners are elected instead of appointed. And the influence of the port on economic development in our community is very broad, as it was intended to be. The port is responsible for the Bellingham shipping and cruise terminals, Squalicum and Blaine Marinas, the downtown waterfront project, and 1.37 million square feet of office, commercial, and industrial building space. And then the legislature recently threw in the responsibility for providing broadband access to rural Whatcom County, internet access. That's a lot of balls in the air. So among other things, we have asked Rob to update us on the waterfront projects, plans for the airport, the effect of the new airline service in Everett, and of course, what are we going to do about the rising seas? Please help me welcome Rob Fix.
Thank you, Claudia. That was a great introduction. Can everyone hear me okay? Is this good? So when Claudia introduced and said my proudest achievement was my two kids, I only heard one laugh, and so I figured that means only one person in this room knows my kids. The Port of Bellingham is governed by three commissioners, three elected officials. As Claudia mentioned, we're a little unusual like that in the state of Washington. In most states, the governance of their port takes place by a governor appointee or a board of appointees. And that board tends to be either politically connected to the governor or have the business interests that the governor wants to see put in place at the port. And the ports tend to be one port for the entire state. In Washington, we have 78 ports. Now, there's only like 150 statewide, so we have more than half of them here, and it is because we elect them locally. So every locality has its own port. Here at the Port of Bellingham, your governance takes place by Commissioner Bobby Briscoe, who's on the very left there. He is the commissioner from District 3, and he's in his fourth year of a four-year term. So he's announced he's rerunning. He'll be on the ballot in November. Commissioner Briscoe brings a little particular expertise to the Port of Bellingham, and that he's been a commercial fisherman his whole life. And so when we have things we're dealing with in our marinas, et cetera, he's traveled around and seen it and been there and done that, and he offers a lot of advice on that. In the upper right corner is Commissioner Ken Bell. He represents District 2. And I should mention that we use the county's old districts. So the county recently changed their districts to 5 different districts. We only have 3 commissioners, and I'm pretty good at math, but I couldn't figure out how to divide that up. So we went with the county's old districts, and that way each commissioner has 1 district. Ken Bell has been in place for about 2 years, and then Commissioner Michael Shepard is right below him. He represents District 1, and he too has been in place for about 2 years. These are where the Port of Bellingham has facilities. So we run Blaine Harbor up in Blaine. We're going to talk more about that. We own some property out in Sumas. Obviously run the Bellingham Airport, Squalicum Harbor, Fairhaven Transportation Station, Bellingham Cruise Terminal also down there in Fairhaven, the shipping terminal at the end of Cornwall there, and then of course the Georgia Pacific site. We do collect property taxes, and I apologize I didn't use the best background for this screen. But property taxes, you can see, have been on the decline on a $300,000 home, and that's because we think we manage the port pretty well. When I joined the port as their CFO in 2008, we were collecting over $90 per $300,000 home. And you can see we're down to about $72 now. So we're pretty proud of that number. What do those taxes pay for? A whole host of things, and mostly things that don't have revenue associated with them. So we divide the port into 2 distinct separate entities. One we call our enterprise activities, and that would be airports, marinas, shipping terminals. These generate revenue. And the other is our what we call our community outreach, which is the property tax side of things. So up there you'll see environmental cleanup, open spaces, which are parks. The commission themselves are paid for out of property tax. Our meetings, events, and community outreach, things like 4th of July events, Sea Feast, those are all paid for out of property tax dollars. We do have a substantial real estate portfolio. About 232 businesses operate on port property. That's a total of about 7,000 local jobs. Now, those aren't 7,000 port jobs. Those are other companies that are operating on port property. We have industrial land. In the upper left there, you're looking at the F Street warehouse. That was acquired as part of the Georgia Pacific acquisition. It's a 250,000 square foot warehouse. It has a technology development center in there that's being used currently by Western Washington University and Bellingham Technical College to train students. And then Lummi Fish Supply also has a very large presence in there where they use it for warehousing activities. And we still have about 100,000 square feet for rent if you're looking for a shop or something. Man cave, she shed. Commercial space, we have a lot of commercial space. So you're looking at a picture in the upper right there of iTech, which is now Silfab. They make solar panels. In addition to that, we also have Woodstone. Everyone heard of Woodstone pizza ovens? They're out at the airport. Huge manufacturer, I think largest in the world of pizza ovens, and they just landed the Mod account about a year ago. So every Mod Pizza is one of the fastest growing restaurants in the nation, and every restaurant they build has 1 and sometimes 2 Woodstone ovens in it. Pretty cool that they're made right here in Bellingham. And then we have a lot of marine trades lands. So we have at least 4 boat yards on port property, 1 up in Blaine, 3 in Bellingham, 1 in Fairhaven and 2 in Bellingham. So yeah, 4 boat yards on port property. And then in addition to that, we have a shipping terminal. Here's a picture of the Fairhaven shipyard. On the left there is a picture of the old dock. So when you get about halfway up the dock, you can see that there's a very bright new section on the picture of the right. And the picture on the left, that's wood. And it was falling apart. There's some environmental contamination underneath it. So the port, in combination with the state, put $10 million into that facility to clean it up and put a new pier there. And you can see the results of that there on the right. The vessel that you're looking at, which has the big white pillars on it, is called the Faithful Servant. It's a semi-submersible dry dock. That means that they tow that out to the middle of the bay. They sink it. They pull the ship on top of it that you're seeing a Pierce County ferry there in the picture on the right. And then they raise the vessel, tow it back into the docks right here, and they work on it shoreside. They reverse that procedure when they launch it. Unfortunately for us, the Fairhaven shipyard was doing great in Bellingham, very profitable operation. They decided they wanted to grow, and they went to Sacramento and they bought a shipyard. And that one didn't do as well, and it dragged the whole company down, and they just went through a Chapter 7 proceeding back in April. So that shipyard is now out of business, however, the port has been working with, we've got 5 companies right now we're talking to about utilization of that property. So we're pretty confident we're going to get it put back to productive use here very shortly. All-American Marine is another port tenant. And again, you'll see the maritime theme here. Ports run airports. We tend to run maritime activities as well. And All-American Marine was in Fairhaven. In the very upper right corner, you can see the top of a building there in those pictures. That's where All-American Marine was located in Fairhaven. The biggest boat they could build there was less than 100 feet long. And even then, they were bumping up against the walls. Those of you that know how boats are built, they're built upside down. So the hull is upside down when they build it, and then it's on a rotisserie, and they just flip it over when they start putting the superstructure on it. Well, All-American Marine was literally, when they're building a 100-foot vessel, was about an inch from either wall. And it was a little close for comfort, especially if you own the building. So we moved them to Hilton. Everyone's seen the new big blue building down there on Hilton? That's now All-American Marine. And the coolest part about this story is that they were paying the shipyard about $15,000 to launch their vessels every time they finished up a vessel. So now you can look at the picture in the upper left. That's the Squalicum boat launch. So that's where you would launch a 20-foot bayliner. So from that facility, the blue facility on Hilton, they tow the boat over. You can see the tractor-trailer combination that does that. And then they lower it on the boat launch, and you could be launching right next door to it. And if you want to see this, I believe there's going to be a 5 a.m. launch on Friday. It's a little early, but they tend to take hours. So I bet you if you got there at 7, you could still see the launch. The vessels you're looking at there are kind of cool. The one in the lower right corner is an Argosy cruise vessel. You can go down and actually go on rides on that around Puget Sound. They'll take dinner cruises, that kind of stuff out. And then up above that is a ferry. I believe that's either a Kitsap or a King County ferry. I can't quite see it from here. But that's a fast ferry. And those fast ferries are low wake ferries, meaning that they can go into environmentally sensitive areas at higher speeds because they don't produce as much of a wake. That technology was helped to be developed by Western Washington University right here in Bellingham. It has a hydrofoil, carbon hydrofoil underneath it that the university helped them to develop. We do run the airport. You can see that we expanded our terminal, $38.5 million. We paid for that terminal with what we call revenue bonds. So we issued debt, and then we pay that debt back with the revenue generated by the airport. We did a runway rehab, and that was $29 million. So you've been on that runway before we rehabbed it. It was a bit of a roller coaster ride. It had these dips and swells to it, and the pilot said that wasn't good. So the FAA came to us and said, hey, we want you to repave your runway. We'll pay for 90% of it. So we used 10% local money, so $2.9 million was your local money, and then the rest was federal money to repave that runway. At the time, 2013, I think, was our peak year. At the time, the airport was growing like gangbusters, right? We had a lot of Canadians crossing the border. The Canadian dollar was at par. The ULCCs, which stands for ultra low-cost carriers, those really had just begun. Allegiant was one of the first out of the gate and they're here in Bellingham. So they were growing really fast. And in 2013, we put 600,000 people onto airplanes. Well, then the Canadian dollar went down. And then the ULCCs started going to Abbotsford because Canadian ones started up and said, hey, we love this Allegiant model. We're going to do the same thing. And so more competition, less customers. This year, we'll put about 350,000 people on airplanes. So down about 250 from our peak. And that hurts. When you're trying to run an airport, airports are capital intensive. They require a lot of money to keep them going. You're buying a lot of equipment. When the de-icer breaks, it's not a $500 repair, it's a $50,000 repair. So you can see that adds up quickly. We tend to try to make our airport cash neutral, meaning we don't want to put money in there from the property tax. But these days it's not cash neutral, but we're not using tax to subsidize that. We're using excess monies from our real estate portfolio. And you're looking at pictures right there of our new baggage claim in the upper left, and then the gate holding lobby in the lower right. And if you were through the old airport when it was in the portable trailers, you know that we had like 2 gates, and now we're up to 10. So it's quite a bit of a difference. This is an interesting map. We have 11 direct destinations, 2 to Hawaii. The rest are mostly Southern California or warm destinations because that's what Allegiant's model is, right? They take you to some place where there's sun, and they try and do it cheaply. Up until last year, we had Portland. So before I flip the slide here, I want to point out a couple things. One is Tucson is on that map. That's a new route, and it's selling very well. And the other is that Anchorage is on that. So we have a direct route to Anchorage. It's only seasonal. It's just for this summer. But when Allegiant announced the Anchorage route, they announced 19 city pairs. So that's 19 new routes that they announced. Guess which one was the #1 selling route? Anchorage. So even though it's seasonal, we're confident that it's going to come back as a seasonal and that we're going to be able to extend that season out. Turns out not a lot of people want to fly up to Anchorage in December and January because apparently it's dark all day. But I believe from May through September and maybe May through October, we will keep those planes full. So before I flip slides, I was asked about pain field and what that effect is. And I'm not going to use any four-letter words after I say pain field here, but the effect is big. And I think I'm being probably short when I say it's 5%. It's probably more like 10% drop in our enplanements due to pain field. Look at this route map really hard and picture Portland being on that map. And keep looking at it. We're looking at BLI. Now here's what Alaska did. Here's pain field. Again, same destinations, Oakland, San Francisco, LA, Palm Springs, Phoenix. All those destinations Alaska picked up out of pain field. So about a month ago, I was sitting with our airport manager and we were talking about the Hawaii flights. Because the Hawaii flights are particularly lucrative for our airport because when you go to Hawaii, you don't go for a day, you go for a week. So you park your car at the airport for a week. Anyone know where airports make their money? It's not on tickets, it's on parking. We are in the parking business. That's what keeps our airport cash neutral. So when you start taking away those longer trips, the 7 days in Hawaii, then it's really going to affect the airport. So Sunil, our airport director, and I were talking about what's the effect going to be if we lose Hawaii, and hopefully we'll be able to keep Hawaii. Well, about a month ago, Alaska quit discounting the Bellingham to Hawaii routes, and we're offering huge discounts on Seattle. So we're a little concerned. If you quit discounting our routes, that's not going to sell as well. People will go down and drive to Seattle for a discount. So we're talking to Alaska right now about what that means. We're a little worried about those Hawaii routes. Here's a graph of all our monthly passenger enplanements every year. You can see the peak year there, 2013 is the very top in the green. And then the purple is at the very bottom, and that's this year. We constantly talk to new people about new cities about routes. We talk to new airlines about routes. We'd love to have something direct to Denver. Frontier was doing that very successfully until they pulled out of the West Coast and went to the East Coast. And then we'd like to see Salt Lake City. We think that's another one that has heavy demand. So we're going to put a lot of focus over the next year on Denver and Salt Lake City. Here's what an airport does to your city. So I brought our economic development director here, Don Goldberg. Don, if you could raise your hand. I think he's come talk to you before. Cities can't have a developing economy without a productive airport. It just doesn't happen. If you go around to all the cities in Washington that are any significant size at all, they have an airport. Look at Spokane, Pasco. You have to have an airport. And this is why. $48 million is the blue piece of that pie, and that's what goes into our local hotels as just people coming through the airport. And I can't see those numbers in red. I think it's like, if my memory serves me correctly, about 15 or 17 million. That's in restaurants, and then 6.7 million is the other activities, which are pretty much lift tickets at Mount Baker. No, seriously, it's mostly recreational. That 6.7 is a lot of recreational spending, and we are a recreational community. Big plug here for Sea Feast coming up on August 24th. This will be the second annual Sea Feast. Last year's was a big hit. You're looking at some pictures of that. The Apache helicopter up in the upper right corner was a big hit with the kids. So if you're looking for something to do on August 24th, come on out to the airport. And there's a lot of street food vendors out there. You'll be able to hop into some military aircraft. There's charters being done. You can go up into a helicopter for a quick tour around Bellingham. All that stuff is available for you, so just come on out on August 24th. Let's talk about the marinas. So we have about 2,100 slips total between Blaine and Bellingham, and 800 of those are in Blaine, and the rest are in Squalicum Harbor. You're looking at a picture in the upper left there of both the inner and the outer harbor. And then we've got a deep water cargo terminal in the Bellingham Shipping Terminal. We run the ferry building down every week, right? Every Friday, the Alaska Ferry comes in. And then this time of year, every other Saturday, it does a run as well, which is called the Cross Gulf Run. Probably read in the papers about the ferry system and its funding and the debate that's taken place on that. So a couple months ago, the governor of the state of Alaska said, hey, I'm looking to balance my budget, and this ferry system costs a lot of money. So he completely cut out the ferry system as of October 1. So I got on a plane, I went up to Juneau. I met with Department of Transportation, I met with the legislators up there. We started talking about the Bellingham runs, the Bellingham routes, and we pointed out to them, we took a lot of economic material up there, and we pointed out to them that the Bellingham runs are the most profitable in their system. So why would you cut out and they're really the only ones that make money in their system, so why would you cut out the runs that make money? So the last budget that was passed is about a $40 million reduction in the ferry system. And what I think that means for Bellingham, it's still being worked out. I'm going back up to Juneau in mid-July. But what I think that means for Bellingham is during the peak season, we're going to retain our every Friday run and our every other Saturday. But maybe in November, December, January, February, you may see those runs reduced to once a month, maybe twice a month in the shoulder seasons, once a month in the dead of winter. So I think we're going to come out relatively intact because during those months, those boats are going out 25% full. So you do the math, 25% every Friday, you go out once a month, maybe you're at 100%. It's much more efficient use of the vessel. Ports do a lot of cleanup. So we're cleaning up legacy contamination left over from industry long before we had the strict environmental rules that we have today. And this isn't necessarily port contamination, it's contamination from businesses that operated on these properties when there were different rules. You're looking at a picture of Blaine. There's two what we call MTCA cleanup sites in Blaine. One there is in the tan outlined and one up there in the blue. MTCA stands for Model Toxics Control Act. And what that means is it's a hazardous waste tax. So every barrel of oil that comes into Whatcom County pays a tax to the state. That tax is then turned around and used to do cleanups. And Luann Van Werven, I see, is in the room, and she fights hard to make sure that that MTCA tax being generated is then used to do cleanups and not diverted to other things. And the Port of Bellingham is a large recipient of these MTCA tax dollars because we have a lot of contaminated sites. And we could not clean these sites up if it wasn't for the help of Luann and the other folks at the state that generate these tax dollars to clean them up. So that's our Blaine site. The other big site that you've heard of is the Georgia Pacific site. That to date has probably gone through somewhere in the neighborhood about $50 million worth of MTCA cleanup dollars. The site was purchased by the Port of Bellingham for $10. It came with $100 million worth of cleanup liability. So we'll call it $100 million and $10. We're making good progress on cleaning it up. Like I said, we have a lot of state matching funds. We have an insurance policy that the port bought when they first acquired the GP site. So we paid $20 million for an insurance policy that gets us about $50 million worth of coverage. And then in addition to us buying a policy, Georgia Pacific bought a policy. So I often hear a lot of misinformation about this transaction and that we let Georgia Pacific off the hook. We did not let Georgia Pacific off the hook. They bought a policy that's paying for a lot of the cleanup. The port bought a policy that's paying for a lot of the cleanup. The state is paying for a lot of the cleanup. And when we run out of all three of those sources of funds, guess where we're going? Back to Atlanta, back to talk to Georgia Pacific. And they are fully aware of that. I was just there 2 years ago. I met with them. We pointed out where we're at with the cleanup. We talked about what we think is left with the cleanups. And they are totally agreeable that they are on the hook for that and that they will someday will be coming back to the table to write another check. So I just wanted to clear that up. Let's take a look at the Georgia Pacific site and what's being done down there. So when the port acquired the site, in conjunction with the city of Bellingham, a lot of planning took place. And it was determined that the city of Bellingham would come in there and they'd build the roads and they'd build the parks. The port would do the cleanup, manage the development activity. And what you're looking at is a map of the results of that planning process, which was the marine trades area up there in the dark blue would stay marine trades. The downtown waterfront area, which has the kind of red triangle on it, that would gentrify or that would become mixed use. That means it's going to be retail, it's going to be office, it's going to be residential. The area next to it, which is the yellow and labeled log pond, will be attached to our shipping terminal. And our shipping terminal is there in green. As you can see, the shipping terminal is kind of a small footprint. And it's really hard to compete these days with a shipping terminal that small. We're competing against Vancouver, Canada, Seattle, Tacoma, Everett. These all have huge, huge amounts of land, and we don't. So we want to combine the log pond with our shipping terminal, have a bigger footprint, and be able to attract more shipping business. And then in the very lower corner there in kind of the gold, you see Cornwall Beach. That is now 100% owned by the city, and that will be a park with a lot of park-like amenities in it. Here's another picture of the results of that planning. You can see, I don't have a pointer on this one, but you can see the black double lines going through the site in kind of an L shape. Those are the first two roads that will be built, and they're actually built today. So I wanted to show you what it looked like. The yellow buildings will be retained. There's a blue building in the upper there. That's the granary building. So on the left is a picture of the street right when it started construction, and on the right is Granary Avenue it stands today, and right behind the big white building you can see Waypoint Park. Both of those installed by our partners at the city. You can drive on to Granary Avenue today. You can go in there. The port's built a little parking lot off of it. You can park. You can walk over to Waypoint Park. You can walk around the site. You can walk out to those tile tanks, walk out to the digester buildings. We prefer you didn't drive on the site. We prefer you keep your car in the parking lot, although I went down there one day and someone must have had a new truck because they had it parked right in front of the digester tanks and standing about 100 yards back clicking pictures of it. But yeah, so we prefer you don't drive. On July 8th, I believe is the date, the city is going to open up Laurel, which is the other half of that L. So Granary Avenue goes in, and then you take a sharp 90-degree turn, and you get to Laurel Avenue. And the reason we're going to open on 8th, the city was prepared to open it a little earlier, probably this week or maybe even last week. But we asked them the port asked them to keep it closed for the 4th of July. We're going to allow people to come down to the site for the 4th of July, but on 6 o'clock on the 4th of July, we're going to close Granary Avenue. The site isn't big enough for just a huge traffic jam of cars that want to watch fireworks. So we're going to open it only to pedestrian or foot traffic. So if you want to bring your lawn chair down, you find a place to park nearby in downtown, walk over here, you can set up your lawn chair right on Granary Avenue, nice even level surface, and you can sit there and watch the fireworks on the 4th of July. On the 5th of July, that morning, we'll reopen Granary Avenue. And then the following Monday, July 8th, Laurel will open, and you'll be able to drive all the way through the site out to Cornwall. So entering on Roeder, going out on Cornwall. The Granary building you're looking at, and the big white building there, is being redeveloped by a company called Harcourts. They're out of Ireland. And right now they've finished one floor of it. The third floor is occupied by a yoga studio. So if you really want to go in that building, you got to take a yoga class. On the tower portion of the building, will be a salon, so you'll be able to get your hair cut there when that portion opens up. The second floor will largely be office space, so that'll probably be closed off to the public. But the first floor is going to be a public market type of a concept, so a mini Pike Place market, if you will. There'll be 10 different vendors in there selling everything from wine and beer to food to coffee. So it'll be a spot that the entire public can come down and enjoy. And then they built an annex off the back side of that building next to Waypoint Park. That annex is going to be a restaurant on the second floor, be a good 2-meal-a-day, nice restaurant. And then the first floor, it'll probably be something that associates itself very well with that public market because they flow together, they're connected. So that's what you'll see in the next couple of months on the Granary building. And then I want to talk about this. This is the millworks. I don't know if some of you might have followed this. The Whatcom Community Foundation, Maury Ingram's group, came to the port a couple months ago and presented an idea for what we call the lignin site. Let me see if I can point out the lignin site here. So kind of the gold building that looks like a stair step near the railroad tracks there in the middle to the right. That is the lignin building. We're going to tear that down later this year. Maury's group has then made a proposal to build what they're calling the millworks. And the millworks is going to have a combination of some affordable housing. It's going to have a community kitchen. So we've identified this need that there's a lot of startup businesses, food trucks, et cetera, that don't have a kitchen to work in, and they're going to be able to do that right here on this site. So follow that as this progresses along. This is a very preliminary idea. So the one thing I can assure you, it won't look like that when it's done, because when anything preliminary tends to change over time. But it'll be a cool concept that does have those concepts I talked about there. And the thing we're really excited about is the food campus. We think that's just very needed in our community, and we're excited to see that going. But that development will hopefully kick off within the next year. It's in the planning stages now. So people always ask me, why does it take so long for this waterfront development to get to some place where I can enjoy it? And this is the port created this to show you why it takes so long. Each one of those little gears, this is a gear wheel, each one of those little gears represents a state agency or an entity that the port has to deal with to get something done. The green wheels, they're done, they're completed. We finished those tasks. The red wheels, they still need to be completed. And I'm hoping there's less red now because this slide is probably a year old. But you know how a gear works, right? If one of those red gears comes to a stop, everything else comes to a grinding halt. And that's why it takes so long. It's an incredibly complicated subject. And when you're dealing with all the different agencies that we're dealing with, it takes time as everyone gets their input and makes sure that we're getting it right. And with that, I'm going to open up to questions.
Okay. Oh, hi. So I'm a cancer survivor that lives uphill from the GP plant, and I read the article in the weekly, which maybe you could comment on, that they're going to be putting herbicides and pesticides on it, and I don't know if that's true or not.
Well, first of all, I'm probably not going to be very popular for saying this, but I don't read the weekly for a reason. Every time there's an article about the Port of Bellingham, there's at least, in the first paragraph, I can point one or two things that are a complete misstatement. That's true with everything I read in that, so I don't read it anymore. We don't use herbicides or pesticides any more than anyone else, and we are currently working, my groundskeeping crew are working with the Port of Seattle, the City of Bellingham, and the Whatcom County to find out how to do herbicides and pesticides in a, what they call a safe salmon, or salmon safe. I'm probably getting the terminology wrong, but these pesticides and herbicides have been designed so that they don't damage the rivers, et cetera, and we're working hard to convert all of our applications to that.
Would you please comment on the architectural award that was given to Waypoint Park and why they got it and who gave it?
You know, I know very little about that. Is Amy in the room? Where's Amy? Let's give microphone to Amy, because the city won that award. So the city installed Waypoint Park, not the port. We can, I put her on the spot, I'm sorry.
I'm going to turn it over to Annalise Burns. She knows a little bit more about the award itself.
You want to know more specifically what the award was about? Is that what?
Who awarded it? And
So it was a private or a organization that specializes in beach restoration, and it was a national competition for beach restoration, and there was 4, as far as I know, there was 4 awarded nationwide, and this was one of the 4. It was submitted by the consultant who designed the project on behalf of the city. We're really proud of it. It's a great project and small, but it is. It took out a bulkhead that was right up close to the water, and they expanded the beach as much as possible. We are monitoring the beach to see if we start to see some forage fish spawning along the grounds as well. So.
Thank you. It's a great park. If you haven't been down there, go down there and see it for yourself. The bulkhead that we removed, that she referred to, was a creosote-soaked timbers. So when you get that creosote out of the water, it benefits the habitat for the fish.
Yes, hi. First of all, thank you for the presentation. I'm relatively new to Bellingham. I've unfortunately read a lot of stuff on the internet, and you clarified some of those inaccuracies. At least I think they are. I have an interesting question. It has nothing to do with environment, has nothing to do with what you're doing now. What I find as a problem in Bellingham is getting out of Bellingham when you want to go travel. The airport seems to only favor the West Coast, and so in your talk, you talked about suggestions for alternative approaches. It'd be nice to have an airport that would fly more to the middle of the country to allow connections to the East Coast. And the second part of it, which is kind of a salient thing to that, is I heard a rumor that there may be a ferry from Bellingham to Seattle, and I'm wondering if you have any information on that.
So let's talk about the airport first. We would love a connection to the central United States, and that's why we're shooting for Salt Lake, Denver. We would take Minneapolis, Chicago would both be good wins, Dallas. Any one of those city pairs, I think, would serve Bellingham really well. Unfortunately, you and I don't get to make those decisions on behalf of the airlines. They make them for themselves. But we are going out and visiting all the major airlines and even some of those really small airlines and startup airlines, trying to desperately get that service up here, because we agree with you. We need service to the central United States. As far as the ferry goes, the first I heard of it was right here, so I can tell you that probably not true.
What happened to the equipment from the old GP? Where did it go? To South America?
No, a lot of it's still here. So we kept what we call legacy historical equipment, and we've got it staged in some of those buildings that are down there. The board mill building, which is a low-profile, 2-story building, that has a bunch of in it. What we call the alcohol plant, which is the building with the blue windows, that has a bunch of equipment in it as well. And our idea is to scatter that around the site with kind of stories talking about how that equipment was used and what years it was used while it was on that site. We intentionally kept a lot of that equipment. The stuff that wasn't kept was scrapped. A local scrapyard came in here, and they had a contract to remove all the stuff that wasn't kept.
Can you tell us what the latest plan for the ASB, the settlement pond, is?
Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you for asking it. This year and next are going to be critical years for the planning of the ASB. So the Port Commission earlier this year directed Port... Oh, sorry. ASB is the Aviation Stabilization Basin. There's a reason I didn't say what it was. So let's look at a picture here. The ASB is the upper left there, the big, it's out in the waterway, and it's the big square. It's not really a square, but as close as you can get to a square without being one, I guess. It's where all the processed water went from Georgia Pacific. It went there to settle before it was discharged into the bay. Now, when the port acquired the property in 2008, we quit discharging to the bay. The first thing we did was we put a bladder filled with air into the pipes that were discharged, and then we've let it just naturally evaporate. We have to get in there and clean it up. It's a mess. It's probably $50 million worth of cleanup right there alone. So over the next year or two, the Port Commission and staff are working on planning what that future use will be, because the future use will drive the cleanup. When the port bought the property in 2008, it thought it was going to convert that to a marina. At the time, there's a 10-year backlog of people waiting to get a slip in Squalicum Harbor. Well, then the recession hit in 2009-ish. People sold boats, and a lot of those boat owners didn't come back. Our wait list now is almost non-existent. If you have a 40 or 50-foot boat, you're going to wait a little while to get a slip in Squalicum Harbor, but we can get any size vessel you want into Blaine tomorrow. So the dynamics of marina boat ownership have changed, and this is true up and down Puget Sound. All my friends at other ports, we have the exact same issue. We have a lot less boats we're dealing with today as people share them. People are choosing to charter a vessel versus own it. So we need less slips. The idea of a marina inside that ASB is no longer feasible. It would require, back in 2008, it required about $12 a lineal foot rate to make that marina viable. We get on average $6 to $7. So we're not even halfway there. So that use is being debated right now amongst the Port Commission, and the use I like best is to fill half of it in and create a bulkhead, much like our shipping terminal. And now we can either have fish processing vessels come in there and they can moor there during the off season, they can work on their vessels, or we can use it as a shipping, sending, receiving type of a operation. Each of those have very high paying jobs associated with them, and that's why I think it's the best use for that area. But stay tuned over the next year or two, and if you have ideas or things you want to comment on that ASB, please come to the port meetings to do so when we have it on our schedule. We advertise our agenda well ahead of time, so keep your eye on our agenda, and we'll be talking about this over like I said, the next 12 to 18 months.
It seems like the models for sea level rise are getting thrown out every other week. It seems like the forecast for that is pretty bleak. Can you talk a bit about your climate adaptation plan in regards to the waterfront? And a second part question, there's 3 condos that are scheduled to be built right in the Whatcom waterway there. Can you tell us what the status is with those?
So I'm going to do the second one first because I think it's a little easier. The condos you're referring to are on the Whatcom Waterway being built by the same folks doing the granary building, Harcourt's Developments, and they're currently in permitting process with the city for getting a permit to build those 3 buildings. They brought a concept to the Port Commission. The Port Commission liked the concept and approved it and said, okay, go get permits and get started. So that's where they're at. Right now they're trying to get permits and trying to raise capital to build those 3 buildings. The last time I talked to Harcourt, there was going to be a mix of apartments and condos, with one building maybe being apartments and the other 2 being condos. But that was still very much up in the air as they see what the market conditions will look like 2 years from now when those buildings would be completed. Remember, it takes a good 18 months to build a building, and that doesn't count the permitting process. So you're 2 years away from seeing those be completed, and but I think you're probably 3-4 months away from seeing the groundbreaking on those 3 buildings. So that'll be exciting to see. Your first question was about sea level rise. And I hate to keep punting to the city, but there's partners in this, and the city has certain obligations, and the port has certain obligations. In the interlocal agreement between the port and the city is in charge of sea level rise, and they do that on a project-by-project basis, and they do it using the best available science today, not the best available science we think may occur in the future. So what that means technically is way beyond me. But the city is keeping a very close eye on it, and when they permit a project, they make sure it meets the threshold of the sea level rise. That's according to best available science.
Rumor has it that the airport may be shut down. How vulnerable is our airport?
It's not. I can tell you. So the question was that the airport may be shut down, and just like the ferry question to Seattle, I've never heard that before. The airport, I told you airports are cash intensive. They're capital intensive. They require big projects be done. You saw up on the board in the last 10 years, we've done $70 million worth of projects in it. That's not sustainable. You can't do $70 million worth of projects every 10 years. But we are prepared to withstand storms. We can have a year where we lose $1 million or $2 million, and then next year maybe we're $1 million positive. We've had a couple of years of some losses, but they've been in the $500,000 range. The Port of Bellingham is really good financial shape. We have a very strong balance sheet. We recently refunded some bonds. That means that when you refi a house, we call it refunding on bonds, but it's like refining your house. We got 2.5%. We got 2.5% because we have a great balance sheet. We're strong, healthy financially. We can weather the storms that are coming at us from the airport. I'm confident of that.
Those of us who have boats down at Squalicum Harbor know how lucky we are compared with all the other ports on the West Coast and the mortgage fees that we pay. Still, it's thousands of dollars that are come in from the mortgage. Millions of dollars worth of boats down there. And those of us on Gate 6 have experienced some break-ins lately. I wonder what you know about the cameras, whether they're operational, or what's going on about security there.
Thank you. That's a great question. And the cameras are operational, but when the police come and they look at the footage and the guy's got his hoodie pulled over his face, that the camera doesn't do any good. But we are addressing it several ways. One, we're going to add more cameras. But two, we're going to change the lock system. So right now, if you've been a customer in our harbors, you enter your gate with a code. And we change that code on occasion. And the reason we change that code is for security. But the minute we send that code out to you as a customer, then you send it to your neighbor who's going to come down on your boat, and then the neighbor brings someone else and he gives them that code. That code gets out throughout the community. We might as well put it on our website. So what we're going to do, instead of the codes, we're going to give everyone a kiosk. It's a lot harder to pass a physical kiosk along to other people. You're going to have to keep that with you. It'll be a slight inconvenience to the boaters because if you do have a guest, you may have to go let them in and walk from your boat back to the gate. But we think it'll result in a higher level of security. We're increasing our security patrols on it. This year has been the worst year. I've been at the port for over 10 years. This has been the worst year of thefts in our marina, and we're going to do things to address that.
I understood you have a new bond. I would like to know the source of revenue from the airport, what supports the airport, so that the bond will be payable for the long-distant future. And another part, the question, some time ago I was going frequently to the airport to park a car so that my son-in-law could get to his job in Anchorage, Alaska. The price at that time was $10 a day. I think we got a reduced price the other day because I saw it was down at $9. Is that a change?
We try to keep our pricing fluid. So if you go to, who's been to SeaTac recently, paid less than $30 a day for parking. Same at YVR, right? I mean, it's over $30 a day. So we're a steal. Painfield, who's our biggest competitor right now, is at, I think, $20 a day. Our main lot is at 14. Our discount lot, we're fluid there. We're going to compete we're going to do what we have to compete. So maybe it's $9 today, maybe it's $10 tomorrow. It's very price, supply and demand based. So if demand is high, I would love to go to daily pricing. My commissioner would never let me do that because they take a lot of political heat from that, but I would love to go to daily pricing where, okay, the lot's full, increase the rates. Similar to what Uber does when their routes are full. Like I said, that's going to be very hard to do. Your question about the new bond we issued was refinancing an old bond, and the debt service has now gone down because we reduced the interest rate on that bond. So same revenues that are paying the new bond were used for the old bond. We didn't pledge new revenues, and we didn't need a new revenue source because our payment is actually less than it was before we did that refinancing. Very durable. We make sure we pay our debt.
Rob, thank you. Could you give us an update on the safety improvements on the 3 railroad crossings in the port?
Thank you. So the question is, the port owns 3 railroad crossings in the Fairhaven area. The city has all the rest of the crossings in Bellingham. And those 3 crossings are Harris Avenue down by the ferry terminal. The crossing by the community boating center is what we call the ferry crossing because it's where all the cars stage when they want to use the ferry. And then there's a private crossing in FMIP, Fairhaven Marine Industrial Park, and that crossing is just used to bring boats across the track on what's called a travel lift. So we're approached by members of the community on what we can do to make what are called quiet zones. We all hear the trains blaring their horns. We all want that to stop. And there's things you can do to improve the safety of crossings that allow those horns to stop. And in the case of the Fairhaven Harris Avenue crossing, all we have to do is what's called a non-mountable median. So it's a median that I think is 6 inches off the ground, and it divides the traffic, and the gate comes down, and you queue up behind that gate. But you can't be stupid. You can't leave your lane and go around that gate because that median is in the way. So that's Harris Avenue. That design has been bought off on by BNSF and by the Federal Railroad Administration, FRA. And so we're going to start construction. We're going out to bid for that sometime this summer. We'll start construction this fall, hopefully have it completed by the end of the year for that crossing. Let's go to the next complicated, less complicated crossing, which is the private one in the FMIP. The boats go across that. All we have to do there is change some signage and a signal. So right now there's nothing. They put their ears to the track and make sure a train's not coming, and then they take the boat across. I tell you what, that scares me. I mean, I watch that. Those travel lifts don't go across at the speed of a car. They creep across those tracks. So what we're going to do is we're going to figure out how to tie into a signal down line someplace, and then they will get, the boat guys will get a flashing light telling them, hey, there's a train coming, either back up or move faster across. And then the one that's proving to be a nightmare is the ferry crossing. And that's the one that goes into the community boating center. And the reason it's a nightmare is there's about 5 different roads going into that crossing. They're coming from the ferry side, they're coming from the Coast Guard, they're coming from the boat launch, they're coming from the parking lot for the boat launch, and they're coming from the road itself. So it's proven to be kind of a chore to design this, but I think we've landed on a quad gate solution. And what that means is instead of a median and just a single gate, you're going to have 2 gates come down on each side. So again, you can't be stupid. You can't swing around that gate and try and beat the train across the tracks. And that's what the railroads are worried about. They want to make sure that no one tries to do that. And so we're designing a system that they will buy off on as being quiet zone acceptable. And I don't know how many people in the room have worked with the railroad, and we think government's slow. Wait till you work with BNSF. My complicated gear wheel would probably be twice as big for BNSF.
Hi, thanks for coming today. My area of interest is affordable housing, and it saddens me to know that the very first housing that's going to be built in the Bellingham waterfront by in the land that's under the Harcourt contract is going to be high-end market rate housing. And I would love to see the port take whatever opportunity it can when Harcourt fails to meet one of the requirements of its contract to end that contract and to manage development at the port itself so that the port can move toward creating some long-term permanently affordable housing for the 50% of Bellingham residents who are now cost burdened just to pay rent. And I wonder if you think that's possible, and how can we get this public housing, or this public land, more serving our local community in terms of the housing that will be built there.
So the millworks side will have about 3 times the amount of housing in it that the first three buildings on Harcourt will have. So those buildings will have about 90-some units, and what Maury's talking about is about 300 units that's down on the GP site. I don't necessarily distinguish between Harcourt and the rest of the site. I will tell you that 10% of the housing built on the waterfront needs to be affordable. So when Harcourt is building within their 19 acres, that's your question is related to, 10% of the housing they built has to be affordable. That's by the agreement we have with Harcourt. It's about the agreement we have with the city. It's what we've told the public. It's what will be done at a minimum. And again, I'm talking about at a minimum that 10% will be built.
Yes, thank you for coming today. I have always been confused about some of the financial aspects of the arrangement with Harcourt, as well as the other parts of the development. And specifically, the city has put in a tremendous amount of dollars in infrastructure. How does the city get paid back? As I understand, port property does not pay the city real estate tax. So what is paid, and is it equivalent on a one-for-one basis on assessed value to real estate tax?
That's a good question. So yes, ports themselves don't pay property tax, but anytime we sell the property to someone else, it gets back on the tax rolls. And we're selling property to Harcourt. That's why we're selling property to Harcourt, is to get it back into productive use and put on the tax rolls. Ports do pay what's called leasehold tax anytime we do a lease. So you saw all the businesses that operate on our property, they pay leasehold income tax, and a good portion of that goes to the cities. So the answer to your question is quite simply is property tax will go to the city to help repay for the infrastructure they invested in. Retail sales tax will go to the city. And then this leasehold income tax for any property that may be leased. So the city has put all this into their calculations when they originally started looking at this site, and they believe the revenue is sufficient if we build out the site according to what the plan is.
My question has to do with what's the next really big idea? If you had an ideal world, something that would really get excited about in terms of the port property.
You're talking about total port, not just the GP site. Well, I failed to talk about broadband, and shame on me. I think that's the next big thing for us, is to get broadband out to our rural areas. You cannot operate a business today without high-speed internet connections. And by broadband, I'm talking about a fiber optic cable that gets out to a community where then they can distribute that bandwidth somehow, whether that's wirelessly, whether that's copper, whether that's more fiber. I was actually, yesterday, I was in 6 different airports to go attend a meeting on broadband with other port folks. And you would not believe the amount of momentum that is coming with getting rural broadband access, because those communities are falling behind. They can't keep up. So we got together and we decided that a bunch of the Washington ports are going to form an LLC, and we're going to operate some of these in some of these rural areas where we can't get a private sector operator, and that'll help us to get the bandwidth out to Glacier, out to Kendall, out to Sumas. The Port of Bellingham is going under contract this year to build a fiber optic network out to Kendall, and that's what we're calling phase 1. We've got ideas for phase 2, which takes that same fiber and runs it all the way up to Blaine, down to the Lummi Reservation. And then we've got phase 3, which kind of goes up and down on Highway 9 there. And the reason for that phase 3 is it does us no good to run fiber to all these locations if we can't get to Seattle or to Vancouver. And there's basically 3 locations within BC, Washington, and Oregon. So let's start with Oregon. There's what's called the Pittock Building in Portland. In Seattle, it's called the Weston Building. And in Vancouver, it's called the Harbor Center Building. It amazes me that these things are as public as they are because of terrorist activities, but this is where all fiber ends, in these 3 cities. So we can build all the networks we want out to Sumas and to Bellingham, but it does us no good if we're not connected to the Weston Building in Seattle. So the Highway 9 route, the phase 3 that I'm talking about, is an idea to get us connected from Harbor Center all the way down to Seattle. And that connection exists today. There's 2 of them. AT&T has one, Zayo has the other. One runs under the tracks, the other runs under the freeway. But in the case when we saw the Skagit Bridge collapse, both of those connections went down. So we need some redundancy, and I think Highway 9 is the best way to do that, and that's why we're going to be pushing hard for more state funding and the ability to run this fiber up and down Highway 9. But look for the Kendall connection to occur sometime later this year. And broadband, I think, is going to be, for rural areas, because we already have it in the city, is going to be huge. And one of the things that was brought up yesterday in my meeting is that folks are now starting to run fiber to individual homes. And that to me is just incredible. They're going to have 100 gig of access in someone's home. And the reason this is occurring in certain developments is because they believe that the home office and the way we work is drastically going to change, and much more people are going to need that kind of bandwidth from their houses. And I think it's one of the biggest things the port's going to focus on this year is our broadband stuff. So thank you for that question. I'm good. Yep, I'm good.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, the Georgia Pacific land is subject to liquefaction. And the Capitol buildings down there were built on hundreds of pilings down the bedrock. Will the port retain ownership and lease back to businesses? Or are you going to sell the land?
So you're specifically talking about the Georgia Pacific site?
Yes.
Okay. So the Harcourt agreement calls for about 19 point some acres of land to be sold to Harcourt. And the port took that approach for a couple of reasons. One, to get it back on the tax rolls, right? But 2, it was because we have to pay for the cleanup. And in order to pay for the cleanup, we have to sell the land or have some source of revenue to do that. And we determined the best way to do that was a sale versus a long leasehold payback. Your question about the liquefaction is spot on. And scientists have looked at down there. They've determined what it takes to build down there. Building down there is not cheap. It's probably some of the most expensive building that's going to occur in Bellingham because you have to drive piling, and you have to drive them deep to get over this liquefaction issue. What amazed me, though, is when we did the granary building, we first started working on that, or I should say when Harcourt first started working on that, they dug a big trench along the building, and they had people go down and look at the shape of these pilings. And I think that building was built in 1911. These pilings were flawless. They were in incredible shape. Now, we manage a lot of pilings. I couldn't even tell you the number. It's in the thousands. Most of that's in salt water, and these things deteriorate. They get eaten by bugs, et cetera. But it turns out when you're encased in mud and that deep, nothing's eating it. So the granary building pilings are in great shape. I don't know what the board mill or the alcohol plant pilings look like. We haven't done that investigation yet. That'll be coming soon. But all new buildings will be required to have be seismically fit so that they're acceptable by those standards. And those standards, those seismic standards are pretty stringent.
Yeah, Mr. Fix, thank you for coming here. So while we're talking about money and getting stuff back on the tax register, the granary building and the .65 acre lot were sold to Harcourt for $200,000. And this works out to be about $7 a square foot. And by contrast, just to put it in perspective, a $100,000, 7,000 square foot residential lot would be about $14 a square foot. So my question is has the port evaluated the costs that Harcourt bore to rehab the granary building to determine if the valuation of $200,000 for a 0.65 acre lot was completely inappropriate? And then the follow-up would be, and what other private enterprises are buying waterfront properties?
So we have an agreement with Harcourt that is now at about, it goes with inflation, and it started at $20 a foot, and it's now at about $23 a foot. So that's for most of the land they buy. They bought the residential parcel. They've only bought two things. They bought the granary, and then they bought a parcel to build these residential units on along the Whatcom Waterway that we talked about. They paid $23 a foot for those residential parcels, and that they'll pay higher than that for any new parcels they purchase. The granary building was a one-off, and it was a little bit different because the port was planning on tearing that building down. We went into it and evaluated it. We did the math, and we said, there's no way we can make this work. Harcourt came to us and said, we'll take a loss on the building if you sell it to us a little cheaper. We'll take a loss on it because we think it's a great cornerstone to this development. We think it's a great community driver, and we'll get the community down to the property. So we sold it to them cheaper because we were going to spend $500,000 to tear that building down. So we took that $500,000 and said, okay, you're going to save us $500,000, add the $200,000 on top of that for $700,000. Now you're a little closer to market rate. You're still not at the $20 a foot. You still may not be at market rate. But to get the project kickstarted and to get things going, that was a conscientious decision by the port to sell at those prices.
And then the follow-up would be, and what other private enterprises are buying waterfront properties?
The port doesn't sell property typically. I think I mentioned that earlier. We're selling to Harcourt because we did the cleanup and we needed a revenue stream to pay back that cleanup costs. We did an RFP. We didn't just pick Harcourt out of a hat. We did an RFP and asked for proposals from any and all comers that are interested in redeveloping that site. We got 4 proposals, and one clearly stood out above the rest. And we had a committee that made that selection that was comprised of city folks, port folks, and some private sector folks that made that decision.
Thanks for everything you've said today. Back to the broadband, you mentioned looking, the first chunk was going to be by the end of the year. I can't remember exactly where you said, but it won't do any good yet until you go up and down Highway 9. Is that right?
Not quite right. So, but thank you for asking to clarify that, because I'm sure that it was a little confusing. So the first chunk goes out to Kendall, and it may not be functional by the end of the year, but I believe it'll be under construction, or we'll at least have a contract for putting it under construction. That will currently connect to Bellingham, and we do have capacity right now in Bellingham to have additional connections. So you will still be able to get, the traffic, the data we'll get from Seattle to Vancouver. What's going to happen, though, as we connect more of these rural communities and we get more 100 gig users online, is that capacity will run out. And that's why we want to build what we're calling Phase 3, which is a new connection between Vancouver and Seattle, which has an off-ramp to Bellingham. But we're okay for the near future. We're just looking long-term, saying, 5-10 years from now, if the usage keeps picking up like we've seen in the last 5 years, we're going to run out of bandwidth. So we need to start planning for that. But that first phase connection will be operable and functional without Phase 3 being operable.
Do we have any other? Got right here.
Thanks, Rob, for your comprehensive presentation. I'm curious what you think will become of the alcohol plant and the board mill, assuming they have those healthy pilings.
Well, if they don't, they'll have to drive new pilings, because I think both buildings planned on being retained. The alcohol plant is in the 20-acre footprint of Harcourt, so they have the option on that. The board mill building is not, but they've expressed a desire to have the board mill building. So we're trying to negotiate with them on what we remove from their 20 acres so that we can substitute the board mill building in. Those negotiations are ongoing. The port's decided we want a couple other things out of those negotiations, so it may take a little while. But their desire for the board mill building is to turn it into a 4-star hotel with a big conference facility in it. And we've identified that need in Bellingham. There's a lack of big conference space in Bellingham, and Harcourt has expressed a desire to convert the board mill building to just that. So the thinking is they would take that 2-story brick building now, they'd make that the lobby, they'd make that a coffee shop, and maybe some meeting space. And then immediately behind that, they would build a tower which would have the guest rooms in it. And so that tower would be new construction. We think it's a good project, but we're still not quite there yet with them. The alcohol plant, It's not quite as good of shape, or it wasn't really ever a building. It's an equipment shelter. It was built to house equipment. So it's got a little more work needs to be done to it. But we've told Harcourt that the deal is $20 an acre, and that we'll have the building appraised, and whatever that comes in at, they can buy it for. I think you'll probably see some office use out of that, maybe. It's kind of a weird building in that it's a T shape. So I think the taller part of the T will end up being like office or some use like that, but then the lower part, which is really high ceiling and long building, that may end up being some sort of community use. Some of that may end up getting chopped off on the end of that because the park goes right through there, so we want to make sure we have plenty of park down there. But that planning is ongoing, and keep watching the commission meetings because we're having those discussions right now.
2 questions, if I can. First one, back down to Fairhaven. Several years ago, it was reported that the dry docks had been sold and would be removed from town. They were going to go off somewhere else on the coast. I believe one did leave, and we have one left. Maybe it's still 2 left.
Yeah.
Is the bankruptcy that you just referred to earlier going to affect those dry docks? Are we going to continue to have dry docks there?
Excellent question. And I can't answer it because right now those dry docks are owned by a bank. So the bank took over all the equipment from the Fairhaven shipyard because they had a lien on it. So when banks loan money, they loaned money to buy the Faithful Servant, which is the bigger of the 2 dry docks. When they loan money, then they take that equipment as collateral. And if the loan isn't paid back, then they take that equipment. And that's what's happened. The bank owns that equipment. The port is working closely with the bank. And I mentioned there's 5 interested parties in that shipyard. All 5 of those parties are talking to the bank and talking to the port. And we are hopeful we can retain both those dry docks in Bellingham. We don't want to see them leave Bellingham.
Second question is, what's the current status of Western on the GP property?
So there's a team of folks, I'm not included in that team, but there's a team of folks that are from Western and the port that are working on that very question as to what Western's presence will be down on the waterfront and what that looks like. There's currently about 6 acres have been always thought of as being an ideal location for Western, but that I'm not current on what that team work is, but I know they're going to try and wrap up by this fall and make a recommendation back to the Western Board of Trustees and back to the Port Commission as to how that 6 acres or how Western's presence will be on the waterfront. So hopefully next year if I come back at this time, hopefully I'll be able to answer that question.
Thank you. In the early days of the planning for the GP site, I know that there was some discussion about working with our local native tribes and putting a cultural center or museum on our waterfront, which historically was one of their places that they would, make their living from. Is there anything happening?
Yeah, so the question is there any kind of cultural or heritage museum for Native American presence down there? And the answer is yes. We haven't figured out exactly where that's going to be, but the Port Commission has definitely expressed a strong desire on having some sort of a cultural heritage center down on the waterfront. And we're in constant discussions with our friends out at Lumbee Nation about how we work together better and what we can do to help them, et cetera. And that topic has come up several times. So I can't give you a specific, this is what it's going to look like and this is where it's going to be, because they're planning on their end what it's going to look like, and we're trying to figure out where it should be located. But you will eventually have a presence of some sort of a cultural heritage center down on the waterfront.
Okay. We want to thank you very much. Thank you for